Hello and welcome to Sustain. Bienvenue à Sustain. We are here today and we're going to be talking to an amazing guest about what it means to do open source sustainability. Before I introduce our guest, I want to make sure you also know who the other voice is on this podcast. I am your host, Richard Littauer. Name hasn't changed recently. Great to be here. And I'm joined today by Amanda Casari. Amanda, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's glad to see all of you today.
The A's in your name. It could be Casari, but it's Casari. Does anyone ever mess up the A's in Amanda?
Well, I don't know if I say mess up. I think there's different interpretations and pronunciations, which I'm willing to roll with. My last name definitely gets pronunciation from Italian immigrants who then went to New Jersey. So that's where you get the variation on maybe what it may be pronounced otherwise.
Okay, too much chat. That's really fascinating, though. Clearly, I've had coffee. And let's talk about our guest today. We are joined today by Julia Evans, calling in from Montreal. Very excited about this one. Julia is an awesome artist and comic maker and zine maker. And we can't show you any of her zines because this is an audible thing that we're doing. It's not a visual thing. And I'm so sorry about that. But we're going to talk about it anyway. We're really excited. Julia is smiling. Julia, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Julia, I first heard about your work years ago. You were making these awesome zines for networking. I have them here somewhere. It's a couple of pieces of paper stapled together. How did you get started making zines, and what kind of zines are they? How are they related to, say, open source?
So I guess I got started making, the reason I got into making zines is similar to the reason that I got into blogging, which is because I was using tools for example, let's say strace, which is a tool for tracing system calls that I'm really obsessed with. And I would read about it. And when I read about it, I would read about it in a very abstract way. People would be like, oh, well, strace is a tool for tracing system calls. And here are the command line options. And I would have all these questions what are people using this tool for? Concretely. So A, what is this actually for? What do people actually use it for? And B, there's all these different flags and things. And when I actually used it, I would be like, oh, I only use 3 flags. And the actual facts about how I used it were so contained. It was so simple. And I felt often when I read about these tools, especially systems tools, it made it seem really complicated. And then I just wanted to show people, hey, this is not that big of a deal. And also here's the context where this tool is actually useful. So I wanted to take more of a personal approach. This is how I use this tool. This is what I use it for. Because I feel that's really important information that often I was frustrated that I didn't have access to.
One of the things I've really enjoyed about watching your zine evolution over the years is that you just dive right in, right? You're talking about strace as if that's a tool that the normal human uses. Can you tell me how you got into development? Are you a programmer at your main job? Do you have a main job? What do you do that you're using strace?
I worked as a programmer for maybe 8 years. Right now, my job is to write zines, but I did work as a programmer. That's the only other job I've ever had, basically, other than being a math tutor.
That's pretty awesome. That's really, really cool. Tell me about some of the other zines that you've made. You just mentioned strace, which is a tool for debugging tracing stuff.
Yeah. So I guess I brought that up because that was the first zine I ever wrote because I was so obsessed with this tool. And it's also kind of like you mentioned, an obscure tool. So I wanted to explain to people why I was so obsessed with it and why it was so important to me. Some other zines I've written about, I often write about things that I think either will help the people who I know. Often one person will make one single comment and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm now going to work on this for 4 months because you said that. For example, I had a friend who I really respected who was very senior, who was just I'm afraid of bash. I hate bash. I never want to use bash, which I think is probably a feeling a lot of people have. And that made me so mad because I was like, oh, I kind of like bash. I feel good about it. And I wanted to write a zine just kind of explaining how I think about bash and why I felt maybe to make it seem less scary. And another example of that is my brother was getting into programming and he was talking about debugging and he was describing his strategies. And I was like, oh, there are some things in debugging that I think you should know about. So I wanted to write a zine for him and also for other people. And it ended up taking 2 years to write. But we ended up writing this really nice zine called The Pocket Guide to Debugging with my 58 favorite debugging strategies. That's how I think about what to write about.
I absolutely adore and would love to hear more about one of the things I also really love about the zine concept for explaining technical topics is you're taking something abstract and making it abstract in a different way, but in a way that somehow becomes more concrete. And I know that sounds kind of convoluted, but I think it's amazing how it's this different people understand concepts in different ways. And I feel like the work that you do explaining something that is a different kind of abstraction into a way that allows people to understand it at a very fundamental level is fantastic. So I'm really curious where you say that you love a concept or you love a tool. How do you think about taking that from that thing that you love and you know well down to like first principles that you can explain to people and you can explain through this combination of imagery and storytelling and words?
I guess the first thing I want to say about that is that it's very hard. I just wrote a zine about Git, which maybe we'll talk about later. And it took me so many years to feel like I could even approach that topic because I was so confident using Git and I didn't know what to even say about it. And I'd been trying to say things to people about it. Like someone would be like, oh, I'm struggling. And I would try to say something and they'd be like, that's not helpful. They wouldn't say it in that way, but they would, I would get the very clear sense that what I said was not helpful. And I was like, okay, this is a challenging topic. And when I started out writing zines, I wrote about things that I was much closer to learning. So when I wrote about strace, I just learned about strace a couple of years ago. And so I had a much better sense of this is what I wish someone had told me maybe 2 years ago when I started using this tool. But it definitely is much more challenging to write about things that I'm further away from. What do I do? I have a coworker, Marie, who I work with really closely, who sometimes doesn't know about these topics. So we can talk through it. That really helps. We'll talk about it for like dozens of hours. So that makes a big difference. What else? I also try stuff. I'll write something that I think might be helpful and I'll post it and I'll see how people respond on Mastodon. I'll see if it works or not. Often it doesn't work. And then I'll try something else.
Yeah, I love that iterative process of the like having somebody that you're partnering with along the way and going back and forth of presenting things in the open and talking about. I think that's just not only is the heart of this whole community, right? Of like how we work together and share together. I'm curious, is there anything else that you do? You just said the last zine took you 2 years, which I would love to hear more about. Is there anything from this latest one that you'd feel comfortable sharing about either how your process evolved or how you feel like you've evolved as a writer and a creator because of this?
Yeah, the Git zine took 8 months to write. And one thing that I did differently with this zine was I started doing a lot of polls on Mastodon to ask people just like how they were feeling about Git, what was going on with them. And it was really useful. One question I asked was, how confident do you feel that you know what the word fast forward means in Git? Because I've been kind of thinking fast forward is a core concept in Git. And 21% of people who replied said they have, quote, literally no idea what it means. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm wrong that people know what this means. We got to explain it. And it made me really realize that I need to be clear about what the meaning of that term was and that people might not have already understood it, even if they've been using Git for a long time. Another example of that was I wanted to talk about Git branches. And originally I was also like, we all agree about what branches are. Branches are clear to people. Not true. I was 1000% wrong about that. And I started asking people like how they think about what a branch is. And do you think about it as just the commits that like branch off? Kind of like in the tree metaphor, right? Is it the branch gesticulating, which I shouldn't, but kind of like a branch of a tree? Or is it like the history of every previous commit all the way back to the beginning? Or is it just the commit at the very end of the branch, right? And most people said that it's just the commits that branch off in their mind, which was really helpful, which really also makes sense because that's literally the metaphor that you're being told to use, right? In the terminology that Git is using. It also made me realize that I think about it that way a lot of the time, right? That like there are these 3 ways to think about a branch and you need to think about it in all those different ways when you're using Git at different times in different situations, which is not trivial. And maybe really understand better why the concept is a little bit slippery for people.
I really like that breakdown of how branch works. I'm realizing I often don't think of it that way, and it's because of the metaphors I use, right? So I think of the last thing being a leaf, because a leaf's at the end of a branch. And so it's really clear to me, but you're right, that could also just be a branch, and I can see some people doing that. When you draw, you're not an incredibly detailed drawer. You're not painting with pastels. It's more XKCD, but with fun. It's not that basic, but it's somewhere around there as pen and paper. And so I feel like the majority of your work is kind of going into metaphors and making simple language and talking it over. You said you use polls. Do you also do like beta zines? Do you like show your zines to like a friend to be like, does this make sense to you? How does that work?
I used to do this in a very kind of like basic way. Like I would show the zine to a couple of people and ask them what they thought. I guess what happened is 3 years ago, I read this book called Write Useful Books by Rob Fitzpatrick, which I really loved. And it was about how to write books that are really useful to people, right? And really actually solve the problems that they have. And what he advocated for in the book was to get a lot of beta readers, have a lot of people read the book and have them comment really specifically about what's working for them and what isn't. And so what I ended up doing with my coworker, Marie, is we did this 3 years ago. We built this custom website where I could send it to beta readers, send the whole zine to people, and where they could comment really specifically about what about the zine was making sense. So what we do is we ask them to comment about 4 things. Because if you don't give people a framework to comment out what they find confusing, what questions they have, also what they like what they loved, what they learned, most importantly, because really I want people to learn things. And so there's the light bulb emoji, which is what I'm always looking for. Like if a page has a lot of light bulb emojis where people are like, I learned this, I learned this, I learned this. I'm like, okay, this page is working. This is what we want. If it has a lot of confused face emojis where people are like, okay, this page needs a lot of work. And also sometimes people can comment and just leave any comment they want. But what I'm typically looking for is more like questions, what's confusing, what people are learning. And so for the Git zine, we had, I think, 66 beta readers who left hundreds of comments about all these things. And we went through 2 drafts of the zine before we released the final 3rd draft.
So this is clearly also a metaphor for how to write better docs, everyone, for your open source projects. But this is great because you're also working on open source tools, right? Git is open source, and so you can learn about it. Strace is open source, and so you could learn about it. You can talk about it. How do you decide what level you're teaching to? I'm not an strace user, so I'm very confused just right out of the gate. I don't know what it is. Are you pandering to me? Are you pandering to the 20-year, Linux kernel person who's been working on this, who wrote strace? Who are you talking to?
I guess it's always a little different for every zine. For the Git zine, I decided that who I was talking to was people who have been using Git for a while, maybe a couple of years at least, who still don't feel confident with it, who are maybe afraid of it, who feel like maybe there's only 5 commands that right? And typically with my zines, I'm writing for someone who has been using the thing already for a while, but still has questions. I don't really like to write intro material for someone who has never seen the thing before, just because that's so rarely the situation that I'm in. Like when I'm confused about a topic, typically I've already been using it for a while and I have questions. And I think just what I've really needed in my career is more intermediate material instead of beginner material.
I love that balance between the understanding who you're working for and who it serves, with also knowing that varies because everybody has different levels of experience. Richard said, because I'm very experienced in one area in tooling, the other one I can look at and I have no idea what this means. And I never, and at the same time, maybe I need to at a certain point. But things move fast and things move slow. Tech moves fast and sometimes tech moves slow, where there's always this debate, I think I see where folks now of, does stability equal security, or does stability equal, is stasis a good thing? We talk about this, we talk about sustainability all the time and what it means to be sustainable. And so acknowledging that you're creating printed materials, this is content, right? This is something that's staying in place. How do you look at and understand for technical projects what material, when you put it down in either a PDF or a book or documentation or a zine, is going to stay that way and you don't have to go back and edit it in a year or 2 years? How do you balance that out when you are trying to reach that intermediary step or that intermediate programmer who's not just either starting off or isn't diving into the weeds and it won't change for them?
So I like to write about things that have really strong backwards compatibility guarantees. So for example, on the web, you have HTTP, you have CSS, you have DNS. And sometimes those things have those guarantees because, for example, CSS, we know that the Space Jam website you can still look at from the year 2000 because that's how the web works. Once you have something, you have to keep it forever, for better or for worse, which is what I love about the web. So if I write about something about CSS, I know it's going to be that way in 10 years because all the browser engineers are putting a huge amount of work into keeping it that way. It's not just magic that's how it's going to be, but people have decided this is the social contract. Similarly with Linux, Linux is very backwards compatible. The system call API is backwards compatible. So you know that if you say that this is how something works today, it's also how it's going to work in 10 years. And I think also kind of similarly with DNS, there are things on the internet protocols where if you change them, it would break for so many people that you just can't. So I tend to write about things that don't change in that way. I guess I should also say that that's the kind of thing that I personally like to learn. I don't like to work with very fast moving technologies. It stresses me out. And so I like to learn about things, like to spend my time learning about things, which I know are going to be the same in 10 years. And so even if the thing is really annoying to learn about, like Bash could be annoying to learn about, but at least I know it's a skill that is still going to serve me in the future.
This is the point where I realized how much smarter Julia is than the average person. Because I've wasted so much of my life in JavaScript land, and I'm not getting it back, and all that is useless now. So that is very, very smart and awesome. I love that. That's the brilliant, amazing.
I mean, JavaScript has the same thing. Like JavaScript.
Yeah, but React doesn't, and Angular doesn't. Like they're all gone. Sure. Like all my hard-won learnings are just now somewhere else. I'm really curious about the medium that you use to write in, because you could teach a lot of stuff. You are really interested in learning about how to share metaphors, how to share learnings, how to get the average person to become better than average person at tools, right? And when you look at something like Git, yeah, it's going to be around in 20 years. It's been around 20 years now. And there's all sorts of tooling online. You could build YouTube tutorials. You could do one-on-one classes. You could probably teach at UQAM, like the university in Montreal, about Git. Why are you making what you're calling zines, even though they're really just PDFs that you could print out? Why this format? Why not other formats?
Why the zine? I mean, I love print. I love writing. I'm really a writer. I don't really like to I don't know how to make videos, really. It's not a format that I know. It's like, well, I thought about writing books, but I don't really read technical books. Like I find when I want to learn about something, there's often only a few things that I want to know about it. I don't usually want to learn a book's worth of information about a topic because I'm a generalist. Like I work in like different languages. I don't really go super, like I've never been like a JavaScript expert. Like I write a little bit of JavaScript, like I make websites, but I don't really know JavaScript super deeply. And so usually I only want to learn like really the most important things about a topic because I try to learn about so many different things. And so I guess the zine feels like it has sort of like the amount of information that I could get from like talking. Like my dream when learning about something is always like, I just want to talk to someone who's like really, really smart for like 2 hours. And then they'll tell me everything I need to know. And that's been my experience a lot of the time, right? Like I'll go talk to someone who's really, really smart and they'll tell me all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like that's all I needed to kind of go forward. And then I could read the documentation or whatever. And so I want to kind of give people that experience of, oh, here's a really short thing that tells you what I think you need to know to get to like the next step.
Yeah. I'll also challenge Richard on I feel like what you do is fundamentally harder because writing a book, like you get all the space in the world to think to be like, oh, I'll throw this into, somebody might find that interesting. So I think the format you consistently choose is actually way harder than writing a technical book because when you get the length of a book, this is someone who is a book co-author somehow, you can throw in anything you want. You can add in ideas, you can address different kinds of readers, you can try to expand, you can go off on dead ends and maybe an editor doesn't catch it or one technical reviewer finds it interesting, so you leave it in there. And so I think that format of not just choosing to write or to illustrate or to explain, but in a specific format and with specific kinds of storytelling is challenging and so effective. I love taking the concepts and then really finding the heart and then breaking it down. And I can understand and see why that would take not only this like deep understanding, but also this curiosity of then, now you know it well. How do other people take what's in your head and then like have that translation? I wonder for when you're looking at those different formats and you're working through these different pieces, when you start to think about how people are approaching the work and how they're consistently approaching your work, do you have like a vision of where you want to go beyond the next zine? Or is there like a larger idea that you have and what you want kind of your body of work to represent with the community and that you're striving for with each time that you're making something new?
I mean, it's a tough question, but in 2013, I did this programming retreat called the Recurse Center, where I learned a little bit about how operating systems work, a little bit about how computer networking works. And when I went in, I didn't really understand what was going on with computers in some way. Like I had a computer science degree. I had 2 computer science degrees. And I was like, okay. But I did a very math-focused computer science degree. And so I felt a little bit unclear on the details of actual computers, if that makes sense. And I knew Python, like I'd made some websites, but I didn't feel like I understood what was going on, like when I made a website or when I made a computer or when I wrote a program. And after I went to the Recurse Center and did some like exploration, I felt like I really understood what was happening when I, for example, wrote a web server. And I felt like I really understood like all the different steps, or even if I didn't understand everything about them, I knew where to look and I knew how to inspect them, like how to look at what was happening at each step along the way. Or I knew about it a lot more and I knew where to start. And I think that feeling of just like feeling like you understand what your computer is doing or like what your programs are doing when you run them is really important to me. I think about it as like being a wizard. That's why it's called wizard zines, is because like when you really know what's happening, then you feel like a wizard. And in general, I want other people to have that feeling like they really know what's happening and like you have control, and also that you can do weird stuff. Like I love to do weird stuff. And so I always want to be like, well, if I know exactly how this works, I can make it do something super weird. I want people to feel like the computer is fragile. I want you to feel like you can do whatever you want, and it might get weird, but you can work it out.
I love that. The Recurse Center also is totally awesome. So it's a place where you can go and just study what you want to do there, right? There's no tutorials or like mandatory things. It's like you sign up and you just go research and have a good time. Were you also involved with Bang Bang Con at all? I know that came out of Recurse. Can you talk a bit about that?
So I co-founded Bang Bang Con with 4 or 5 other people in 2014. The idea was just to have a conference with really short talks. There's kind of a theme of really short things, maybe, with 10-minute talks about what's exciting about programming, like cool things that we've done, weird things that we've done. I think there's definitely the like get weird theme is extremely there. And this year is the last year.
In Santa Cruz in August. Will any of those talks be online by any chance? Do you know?
Always. Yeah. All the talks have always been online. So there's 10 years of delightful 10-minute talks about the weird and wonderful things that we can do with computers.
I love Bang Bang Con so much. I went to one of them. My friend Rafiq Joy did an awesome talk on how to turn a zip drive into a little orchestra. So it would put the floppy disk in and out. And he just really wanted to do that. And so he programmed that. And that's just like the coolest thing ever. When you say, I like doing weird stuff with the computer, what sort of stuff are you doing? Right now, I know that you're making zines, and I know that you're working on Git and maybe S tracing. Like, do you have any examples of what you mean?
Let me think of something weird you can do with a computer. Okay, this is not that weird. But when I was working on the zine about DNS, I was thinking about how when you make a DNS query, you don't get to see where it goes. If I request lookup google.com, it goes to a DNS resolver, and then the DNS resolver will send it to the authoritative source. So you have this intermediate cache that you send it to, and then it gets sent to the like what's called like the authoritative name server, which is the one who really knows. But that whole conversation is kind of invisible to you. Like you can see the first part of it where you talk to the resolver, but you can never really see the part where the middle part talks to the authoritative name server because you don't have control over either of those. And so I was thinking about how I don't like not being able to see things. I love being able to see what my computers are doing. It's upsetting to you when things are invisible. And so I was thinking about like, why does this need to be invisible? And so what I did was I wrote an authoritative name server that would tell you everything that everyone asked it. And so I wrote it as kind of like a little like DNS tutorial where you can make DNS records, and every time someone requests them, it'll just tell you what they requested. And this is something that like I had never seen, and I just thought it'd be cool to make it. So I did. I don't know, I wrote a DNS server. It's called Mess with DNS. It's at messwithdns.net. It's been running for a few years.
I love just the concept of, I just thought it'd be cool to make it. So I did. That's the best, right? This morning, I thought it'd be cool to go look for the least bidder in Waterbury. So I did. And it was great. This is the open source sustainability podcast. And so I do have to ask a question, which is like everyone wishes they could do the weird stuff that they want to do all the time. You know, I wish I could get paid to eat Nutella. I don't get paid to eat Nutella. If any sponsors are listening, I'm open to talking about it. Julia, how do you fund this work? How do you fund this awesome, weird arcaneness? Like, what do you do? How does it work?
I sell zines.
That works? Is it a sustainable business model?
Yeah, it's a sustainable business model. What happened was I was selling enough zines that I was like, oh, I don't need to work at my job. I could just sell zines. And I'm making enough money to do that already. And so I quit my job. And that's what I've been doing ever since. One of the things I've been thinking about with sustainability is it was kind of tricky to do it alone. Like I started getting kind of lonely. So I've been able to hire a couple of people part-time to help me with operations. We have a really amazing operations manager, Lee, now, who takes care of so many things, and it's been really life-changing. And I mentioned Marie a couple of times. I also built Mess with DNS with Marie to try to like design DNS, like a UI that was good. I'm not very good at UI design. So I work with Marie a lot, and that's really been huge. I think we've been working together for 2 or 3 years, and it's really made the business a lot more sustainable. Like for me, it's made it more fun, and it's really good.
I love that so much. That's awesome. Working artist. You live in Montreal. Montreal's, last time I checked, was like the highest quality of life, or like the lowest amount you had to pay like in North America. It's like a beautiful city for that. There's a lot of other issues. The construction is horrible. Can you tell me how that factors in? Do you think that your lifestyle allows you to do this easier? Or do you just make a ton of money making zines and you could live anywhere and you just choose to live where you live? I'm just curious, would you recommend other people make art and sell it? Or do you think you're just really lucky? I don't know. I'm curious.
I've thought about this a lot over the years. I have no idea how to answer that question. Honestly, my relationship to it is like I started doing this and I saw that it was working as a business. And then once I saw that it was working, I started to ask, is this sustainable? And like, what do I need to learn about marketing, for example, to make it a sustainable business? It was never my intention to do this. So if someone asks me like, how would you do this? I was like, I don't know. This is something that happened and now I'm doing, but I really have no idea. And I am very hesitant to give advice because of that.
No, that's fine. It's also like a convoluted path, right? No one wakes up and says, I'm going to be an artist who only does X.
Yeah.
But
I will say that I've never thought about myself as an artist. I think ever. I'm not very good at drawing. I have not gotten better. If you look at the covers, like there are these really beautiful covers, which are done by a really great illustrator called Vladimir, mostly, who I've gotten to work with for 8 years. He's wonderful, but I could never. It's not my skill set.
I love bringing up the fact that it takes a beautiful team with a lot of different skill sets of art, technical knowledge, writing, operations, marketing, to be able to produce things that help people understand and connect better to tools and technology. So building that team, it sounds like, has been a lovely experience and also a journey along the way for you. Is there anything around building something that is sustainable for you with a group of people that you'd be willing to share you've learned along the way?
I try to pay people well. I don't know what to say about this. Like, I try to treat people well who I work with because I want to work with really great people. I guess it's more important to me to work with really good people than to like pay the least amount of money for the help, if that makes sense. I was talking to a friend about this recently, actually, and they were saying that their goal when working with a freelancer is to be the last client that they fire. If the freelancer starts to get more busy and starts dropping clients, you want to be the last one who they keep working with because finding new people to work with is so difficult. So that's something I try to do. I try to be the last client to get fired. That's my dream.
I love that. I love being the person that people want to work with and also finding and paying people well. I think that's an excellent team building strategy.
I also love that. Juliet, we're running up on time. Where can people purchase your latest zine, the Git zine, or perhaps also other zines?
It's at wizardzines.com.
That's an awesome, awesome name. And that's where people can follow you, right? Are you on Mastodon, Blue Sky, any of those sorts of networks?
I'm on Mastodon. I'm on Blue Sky. You got to be everywhere, I guess. Cool. I have a blog at jvns.ca, which is not the best thing to say out loud.
Cool. jvns.ca. Very, very exciting. Thank you so much. And you can also find those links in the show notes, everyone. So do check them out. Do check out the Git zine. It is awesome. It's 70 pages of glory. Highly, highly suggest.
It's definitely 28 pages.
It feels like 70 pages, but it's really awesome. Like, it's very comprehensive. And there's also a Git cheat sheet, which is the best. Don't leave yet, Julia. We have a bit more before we finally close out the podcast. And that's right. This is Spotlight. This is the part of the show where we highlight other people, projects, things who have helped us out in our career and are just really, really awesome. Amanda, you normally do a book. What's your spotlight today?
Yeah, I normally do a book or paper, but I'm actually going to use CSV Conf. It's a lovely conference and organization that I fortunately just got to go to a few weeks ago. a complete data wonk and engine nerd at heart in this conference, and the organizers and everything that they presented was just not only interesting, but I loved the way it was curated. It was much less on positioning or on pedantics of conversations and folks feeling like they were in some kind of struggle, and more about how technology affects change and enables change, which was fantastic. There were talks on art and activism with, again, like not worrying about necessarily even tooling sets, but just like how can we use information and how has information affected change in society. So CSV Conf, it's on its 8th edition this year. Talks are all online. It'll be on its 9th edition next year. Everyone should check it out.
That is awesome. Thank you, Amanda. My spotlight is Rafik Joy. I probably messed up how to pronounce his last name. Never figured it out. Rafik is awesome. When I had a boat that I bought on eBay in Sicily and I needed to sail it to Malta to live on it, I put an ad on Couchsurfing saying, I need someone to help me sail this thing. And this dude just showed up and probably is one of the few people who has literally saved my life. I got so seasick that he actually did all the sailing, and he wanted to sail many things. And he also sails across computer keyboards incredibly well. He's an excellent hacker and coder. He introduced me to Bang Bang Con. And so incidentally, also you, Julia, and your zines. So Rafik is super cool. I'm really excited to see him soon. He's coming over to Vermont for my farewell party. And I just really, really love him. So it's just Rafik, thank you for being amazing. We should get you on the podcast. I should do that. Julia, what's your spotlight today?
I recently discovered this tool called Atwin, which is just a really nice way to search your shell history. I don't know, it has a really beautiful UI. It also lets you sync your shell history across machines, which is something that I do not need right now. But I think that seems like a cool feature. But mainly I've been using it for like when I have a command that I really want to find, but that I did a really long time ago and it's very specific. It's really helpful even using Fish, which has incredible shell history search tooling, but it's kind of like adds a level extra for when I need to go really deep.
I'm installing this immediately. Also love the name from Terry Pratchett. That's great. The Great World Turtle. Julia, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really great. Listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have, there's a few things you can do. One, you can go buy the Git zine. Go do that. You can go to jvns.ca and check out Julia's other thoughts. You can also go to sustainoss.org and find out more about Sustain in this podcast. You can go to our Discourse. You can go to podcast.sustainoss.org and see all of the cool links that we have, the show notes for this made up by our amazing editors. Do go do that. If you want to pay the editors and me and Amanda and other people working on this podcast, you should totally go to opencollective.com. Maybe not Amanda. Okay, just me. opencollective.com/sustainoss. This stuff is not made for free, and we would love more donations. We rarely get them. So if you also work at a company and you want to give back to open source, besides buying the industrial version of the Git zine, you can buy it for your whole team. That'd be really, really cool. So go do that. And then maybe donate to Sustain OSS's podcast. Also like this wherever you find it, Apple, Spotify, etc. That would be cool. And if you have any comments or thoughts, you can hit up Julia on Mastodon and Blue Sky and all the things, or you can email podcast@sustainoss.org. Also, if you want to be on the podcast, that wasn't clear. Someone emailed me recently about that. They're like, apparently this email works. Yes, it totally works. Like it goes to me, like go email. So podcast@sustainoss.org. And that's it. Finally, once more, Julia, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again.